My neighbor bragged at my barbecue. I drink your beer and do your wife. Bad move. One grip, 1 second. He spent 5 weeks on a straw. But that was just the opening. What my wife hid in our daughter's backpacks, what she signed away behind my back, and what a blood test revealed about her youngest. That's where the real war began. My name is Kurt Harwick. I'm 44 years old. I spent 9 years as an Army intelligence officer. G2, the kind of work where you learn to read people, read rooms, read the silence between words. After I left the service, I moved into the private sector. Right now, I run security operations for a mid-sized construction holding company out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I've got a mortgage, a dog named Hector, and 2 daughters who mean more to me than anything I've ever been deployed to protect. Paige is 8. Ren is 6. They're the whole reason this story matters. My wife, soon to be my ex-wife, is Evelyn. 40 years old. She was warm when I married her. Funny. The kind of woman who'd remember your coffee order without asking and then tease you about it for a week. Somewhere around 3 years ago, something in her started to drift. I noticed it the way you notice a room getting colder. Not all at once, just gradually, until one day you realize you've been in your coat indoors for months. The drifting had a name, and that name was Silas Vane. He showed up in our neighborhood about 2 years ago, introduced himself as a narrative transformation coach and a conscious living architect. Tall guy, mid-40s, the kind of man who smiled like he knew something you didn't. He ran weekend workshops out of a rented studio in Dilworth, charged $400 a session, and had a following of mostly well-off women who were going through what he called energetic transitions. In plain English, midlife crises with a branding budget. Evelyn got introduced to him through a friend group. I thought it was a phase. I was wrong. The day everything came apart was the last Saturday in June. We were hosting a 4th of July early celebration. Backyard, grill going, about 20 people, including my colleagues from the firm, Evelyn's yoga circle, our neighbors, and our 2 daughters running barefoot through the grass. I was at the grill, spatula in one hand, cold drink in the other, feeling, for a moment, like everything was actually fine. Then Silas walked in through the side gate like he owned the yard. He helped himself to a beer from the cooler, didn't ask, then strolled over to where I was standing and clapped me hard on the back. Not a friendly clap, the kind that's meant to make you stumble. I didn't stumble, but I felt it. He leaned in close enough that I could smell the beer already on his breath and said, loud enough for the nearest cluster of guests to hear, "Man, you've got it made. Great beer, great food." He paused, let the grin spread. "Great wife, too. Though I'd say I appreciate her more than you do." A few people laughed. Nervous laughs, the kind people use to fill uncomfortable silence. Someone near the drink table looked away. I watched Evelyn across the yard. She had a glass of rose in her hand, and she stood completely still, looking at the fence line, like she was studying something in the distance. She said nothing. Then Paige tugged at my shirt and looked up at me with those big brown eyes and asked quietly, "Daddy, what does he mean?" That question hit harder than the shove. But I didn't flinch. I had 9 years of training for exactly this. Keep your face neutral, keep your hand steady, gather information before you act. What I did next, I'm not proud of in the sense that I planned it to be dramatic. It was just instinct. Silas was still grinning, turning to play to the crowd, when I set down my spatula, stepped in close, and applied a wrist control technique I learned in Combatives Level 2 back at Fort Bragg. 2 seconds. His knees buckled. He went down on the grass, hard, his drink splashing across the patio stones. He'd wrenched his wrist, catching himself on the way down. Later I found out he'd fractured it in 2 places. He spent the next 5 weeks drinking everything through a straw. The yard went completely silent. I picked up my spatula, turned back to the grill, and said calmly, "Food's almost ready." No one laughed after that. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the girls were asleep, I sat on the back porch alone. Hector lay at my feet. The string of lights above the table swayed in a light breeze. I stared at the swing set and thought about Paige's question. I thought about Evelyn's silence. And I decided, whatever was coming next, I wasn't going to react. I was going to respond. There's a difference. One loses. The other wins. I went inside, poured the rest of my drink down the drain, and pulled out my laptop. The work had already begun. The morning after the barbecue, I woke up before 5. Evelyn was still asleep. I stood in the kitchen, made coffee, and watch the backyard through the sliding glass door while Hector circled my feet. The swing set was damp with dew. The patio chairs were still pulled out at odd angles from the night before. I hadn't touched a thing. I wanted to look at it a little longer. Sometimes the evidence is in the arrangement. I'd spent 9 years reading human behavior for the Army. I knew what it looked like when someone was hiding something. The micro shifts, the half answers, the way a person's eyes go flat when they're performing calm instead of feeling it. I'd watched Evelyn do all of those things for months. I just hadn't let myself name it. Now I was naming it. The problems hadn't started with Silas. I need to be honest about that. It started about 2.5 years ago, quietly, the way structural damage starts, invisible until something collapses. Evelyn had joined a women's wellness group. At first it was Saturday morning hikes and shared dinner recipes. Then it became evening workshops, then weekend retreats, then a language shift I couldn't quite explain. She started talking about energy and emotional architecture. She stopped asking about my day, then stopped answering questions about hers. She called me rigid. She said I didn't know how to be present. Maybe she was right about some of it. I'm not a man who processes things out loud. But what she was doing wasn't processing. It was rewriting. The week after the barbecue, I called Declan Marsh. Declan and I had served together at Fort Huachuca. Both intelligence, different specialties, same instinct for reading broken systems. He'd left the Army 2 years before me and gone into private digital forensics. He was the best I knew at building an evidence trail that would hold up under pressure. I met him at a coffee shop in South Charlotte. He looked the same as always, unhurried, watchful, the kind of man who never sat with his back to a door. "Tell me what you have," he said, sliding a small notebook across the table. I told him everything. The workshops, the late evenings, the voice message I'd found on Evelyn's iPad 3 months back. Silas, smooth and certain, saying she was wasting her potential on a man who'd already decided who she was. Declan listened without interrupting. "Digital footprint," he asked when I finished. "I have access to shared devices," I told him. "Joint cloud account, shared home network." He nodded slowly. "Then we start there. Legally. No shortcuts. You want this to hold in court, everything has to be clean." That was exactly what I needed to hear. Over the next 10 days, Declan helped me set up a secure monitoring system across all shared household devices. Keyword alerts, timestamp logs, everything stored on a private encrypted cloud under a shell name. Every conversation Silas and Evelyn had near a phone, a tablet, or our smart home speaker went into the record. Within 72 hours, I had the first piece I needed. Evelyn and Silas, on a video call, discussing our daughters. Not warmly. Silas told her that Paige was absorbing the father's suppressive energy patterns, and that she needed to be redirected toward a healthier emotional model. He said it the way a consultant describes a project deliverable. Clinical. Detached. My 8-year-old daughter was a project to him. I sat at my desk at 11 at night and read the transcript 3 times. Then I opened a separate browser window and began researching family law attorneys in Mecklenburg County. That same week, I got an unexpected call from our financial advisor, Greg Toll. He'd flagged something during a routine account review. The beneficiary on my $800,000 life insurance policy had been changed 4 months ago. The new beneficiary was listed as a nonprofit called the Vein Clarity Foundation. I had never heard of it. I had never signed anything. Declan ran it in 20 minutes. The foundation was registered in Delaware, opened 14 months ago. The registered agent was a name neither of us recognized, but the mailing address matched the studio in Dilworth where Silas ran his workshops. She had changed my life insurance policy to funnel money to his operation. And she'd done it quietly, months before the barbecue, months before any of this became visible. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called Devin Ree, the attorney I'd already identified, and scheduled a consultation for the following Monday. I didn't say a word to Evelyn. I kissed her on the cheek that morning, helped Ren with her shoes, drove Paige to school, and went to work. The calmer I stayed, the more they'd underestimate me. That was the plan. 3 days after I met with Devin Ree and got the consultation on record, I found a notebook. It was in Paige's backpack, tucked between a library book and a folder of spelling worksheets. A thin spiral pad, the kind you'd pick up at a dollar store. On the cover, printed in neat block letters that weren't Paige's handwriting, My True Feelings Journal. Inside, the pages were pre-printed with questions. Not blank lines for a child to fill freely, Structured prompts, typed and formatted, clearly prepared by an adult. When daddy gets quiet, do you feel safe? When mommy cries because of daddy, what do you do? Who makes you feel calm? Mommy's friends or daddy? I stood in the kitchen and read every page. My hands were steady. My jaw was tight. Paige had answered some of them in her careful second-grade printing. Under who makes you feel calm, she'd written, Daddy. He doesn't yell. She'd underlined it twice. I photographed every page, put the notebook back exactly as I found it, and called Declan that evening. Systematic, he said when I described it. Preloaded prompts designed to elicit specific responses. This is coaching, not journaling. We need that documented by a professional. The following morning, I called Dr. Yasmin Clow, a child psychologist recommended by my attorney Devin Ree, and described what I'd found. She asked me to bring both girls in for an informal assessment. Not court-ordered, not alarming. Just a visit to a nice office with art supplies and a fish tank. The appointment was Thursday. Ren spent most of it drawing horses. Paige, halfway through, looked at Dr. Clow and said without prompting, Uncle Silas says Daddy doesn't know how to love people right, but I think he just loves quietly. Dr. Clow didn't react. She wrote something down and said, gently, that's a very thoughtful thing to notice. I was watching through the one-way glass. I pressed 2 fingers against the window frame and held them there until the urge to walk into that room and then the entire situation passed. That same week, Ren started stuttering. It wasn't dramatic, just a hesitation at the start of certain words, a caught breath before she could finish a sentence. Her preschool teacher flagged it on Friday in a handwritten note sent home in her folder. Ren has been having some difficulty with speech fluency this week. Has anything changed at home? I took her to the pediatrician on Saturday morning. Dr. Ariel Crane, who had seen both girls since birth, listened carefully, asked Ren some questions, watched her try to answer, and then looked at me with the steady expression of someone choosing words carefully. Speech disruptions like this in a child her age are almost always stress-related, she said. Something in her environment has shifted. I like to refer her to a speech therapist, but more importantly, what's going on at home? I told her enough. She documented it. The referral went into the file. 2 documented medical concerns in 1 week, both pointing in the same direction. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Evelyn came into the kitchen while I was going over paperwork at the table. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. Ren's teacher called me too, she said. I looked up, and she's fine. Kids go through phases. Evelyn set her glass down. You don't need to turn everything into a crisis, Kurt. I held her gaze for a long moment. I'm not turning anything into anything. I'm paying attention. She looked away first. After she went upstairs, I added Dr. Crane's referral note to my folder, placed Paige's journal photographs in a separate envelope, and labeled both. Then I drafted a message to Devin. We have medical documentation. 2 separate incidents, same week. Child psychologist assessment pending. Moving forward with emergency evaluation request. Devin responded within the hour. Good. Keep everything. Don't confront. Don't change your routine. Let them keep thinking they're ahead. I closed the laptop, turned off the kitchen light, and checked on both girls before I went to bed. Paige was asleep with her arm around a stuffed rabbit. Ren was curled on her side, breathing slow and even. I stood in the doorway for a while. Then I went to my room and started preparing for the next move. Owen Pruitt found me before I found him. I've been running background on Silas Vane through Declan for about 10 days when a message came through my firm's general inquiry line. Brief, professional, no wasted words. I believe we have a mutual problem. I've been watching the Vane operation for 8 months. If you're the hard I think you are, we should talk. Oh, Pruitt, Phoenix, Arizona. I had Declan verify him first. Owen Pruitt, 54 years old, licensed private investigator out of Phoenix, former Maricopa County detective, 22 years in law enforcement before he went independent. 3 years ago, his client, a father named Dennis Farr, had lost custody of his 2 sons in a court proceeding that mirrored what I was now facing almost exactly. Same coaching language. Same manipulation of the children's emotional responses. Same gradual severing of the father from his own home. Silas Vane had been the facilitating influence in that case too, operating under a different name. Dennis Farr had lost. Owen Pruitt had never stopped working the case. We spoke by phone the following Tuesday. He had a flat, careful voice, the kind that comes from years of talking to people who are either hiding something or about to break. Vane's real name is Kevin Doss, Owen said without preamble. Born 1982, Bend, Oregon. In 2014, he was convicted of fraud in Lane County, took money from 6 clients for a grief counseling program that didn't exist, served 18 months, relocated to Nevada, changed his name legally in 2017, started the coaching operation around 2019 under the Vane identity. I wrote it all down. Why hasn't this surfaced before? Because the people he targets don't talk to each other, Owen said. He picks women who are already isolated from their partners, deepens that isolation, and by the time the husband figures out what happened, the marriage is over and the case is buried under custody paperwork. A pause. He's done this to at least 11 families I've documented. You be number 12. I lean back in my chair. 12 families. 12 men sitting where I was sitting right now, probably thinking they were alone in it. I have a forensic specialist working my digital trail, I told Owen. Clean documentation, legally admissible. Good. Because I have something else. He paused. I have a sworn affidavit from Dennis Farr, and I've identified 3 other men willing to provide statements. We can build a pattern of conduct argument that changes the weight of everything you bring into court. 2 days later, Owen drove up from Phoenix, and we met in person at my office in Charlotte. He spread a folder across my conference table, 11 case summaries, each one a family. Names, dates, outcomes. Tactics Silas had used that were identical across every case. The journal prompts, the language coaching of the children, the gradual reframing of the father as an emotional threat. The pattern was so consistent, it looked like a manual. Because it was. Owen had found a private online group Silas ran for his core clients. Inside, step-by-step instructions on how to document a husband's emotional unavailability for family court purposes. How to frame stoicism as danger. How to coach children to express discomfort around their fathers without making it look coached. I looked at the pages for a long time. He built a system, I said. He's been running it for 5 years. Owen confirmed. He just never ran into someone who knew how to dismantle systems for a living. I looked up at him. Until now. Owen allowed himself a small, tight smile. Until now. I called Devin that afternoon. We added Owen's documentation to the file, flagged the fraud conviction, and began drafting the motion for an emergency custody evaluation. The hearing date was still 6 weeks out, but the shape of the case had changed entirely. That evening I came home to find a school enrollment form on the kitchen counter. Evelyn had started filling it out, both girls' names at the top, a summer residential program, the address of property in the mountains outside Asheville. I looked it up in 30 seconds. The program was run by the Vane Clarity Foundation. She was trying to send her daughters to his camp. Without my signature. Without asking. I photographed the form, put it back exactly where I'd found it, and called Devin. She just handed us another count, Devin said. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt the cold, focused clarity of a man who had stopped hoping and started winning. The article went up on a Monday morning. I saw it first through a colleague who texted me a link at 7:15 while I was dropping Paige off at school. The headline read, "He took the kids and called it justice. Inside one father's war on his wife's healing journey." The byline was Petra Wills, staff writer for a progressive lifestyle outlet called The Current Narrative. The piece ran 4,200 words. I read it in my car in the school parking lot while Ren ate a granola bar in the back seat. Petra Wills had spoken to Evelyn, to 2 women from Evelyn's wellness circle, and to someone described only as a close associate of the community, which I recognized immediately as Silas. The piece framed me as a controlling, emotionally withholding man who had used his security background to surveil and intimidate his wife, weaponized the family court system to punish her for choosing growth over compliance, and traumatized his daughters by separating them from their mother's nurturing environment. Not one person had called me for comment. Not one. I forwarded the link to Devin without a word. He called me back in 8 minutes. "Don't respond publicly," Devin said. "Don't post. Don't comment. Don't send her an email." Nothing. I wasn't planning to. I told him. "Good. Let's sit. We'll handle it a different way." The different way arrived 4 days later, through Owen Pruitt. He'd been monitoring Silas's network since our meeting, and he'd made contact with a woman named Clara Voss, a former client of Silas's from his time operating as Kevin Doss in Nevada. Clara had her own story, her own documents, her own family court records showing the same pattern. She'd been trying to find a platform for 2 years and getting nowhere. Owen connected Clara directly to Petra Wills. I'll give the journalist credit for this much. When Clara walked in with a folder containing court transcripts, the Kevin Doss fraud conviction, and a sworn statement from Dennis Farr's case in Phoenix, Petra Wills read every page. Then she made calls. Then she spent a week verifying. The follow-up piece ran 12 days after the original. The headline, "The Coach Behind the Curtain." Questions emerge about the man at the center of a custody battle. It detailed Kevin Doss's Oregon conviction, the Nevada name change, the pattern across multiple families, the unlicensed operation. It didn't name me, but anyone who'd read the first piece would connect every dot. The comments on the original article turned within hours. The outlet quietly removed 3 of the most inflammatory paragraphs from the first piece. Petra Wills, I later heard through Owen, was let go from the publication 2 weeks after the follow-up ran. Apparently her editor had not been informed that the first piece was based entirely on one-sided sourcing. I didn't celebrate. I added both articles to my evidence file. The first as proof of coordinated narrative manipulation, the second as corroboration of Silas's documented history. Evelyn found out about the follow-up piece on a Thursday evening. I was in my home office when I heard her on the phone in the kitchen, her voice climbing in pitch. She said Silas's name 4 times in 2 minutes. Then she went quiet. She didn't come to my office. She didn't say anything to me at all that night. She was starting to understand that the ground had been shifting under her feet for weeks, and she'd only just noticed. Meanwhile, Declan had pulled something that changed the financial picture in ways I hadn't anticipated. Running a deeper trace on the Vein Clarity Foundation's registered documents, he found that the beneficiary designation on my life insurance policy, the change Greg Toll had flagged weeks earlier, had been executed using a notarized power of attorney form. The form bore my signature. I had never signed it. Declan sent the document to a forensic handwriting analyst he'd used on 3 prior cases. The analyst's preliminary assessment came back in 72 hours. The signature showed inconsistencies in pen pressure and letter spacing inconsistent with my verified signature samples. His professional opinion, it was a forgery. Devin went quiet on the phone when I told him. Then he said, "Kurt, this is no longer just a custody case. This is fraud, potentially criminal fraud." He filed an emergency motion with the court the following morning, citing the forged document, the unauthorized policy change, and the financial connection between the foundation and Silas. He also contacted the insurance company's fraud division directly. The motion got the court's attention fast. 3 days later, Judge Halbert issued a temporary freeze on all joint financial accounts pending review and ordered both parties to submit full financial disclosures within 10 business days. Evelyn's attorney called Devin that afternoon demanding to know what we'd filed. Devin read in the motion summary, calmly, without editorializing. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Evelyn's attorney said he needed to consult with his client. That night, I sat on the back porch with Hector at my feet and the girls asleep upstairs. The neighborhood was quiet. Down the street, someone was mowing a late lawn. The string lights above the table swayed in a light breeze. I thought about the man I'd been 6 weeks ago, standing at that grill, telling myself the problems weren't as bad as they felt. I wasn't that man anymore. And the case wasn't a case anymore. It was an avalanche, and I hadn't pushed it. I just stopped standing in its way. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, while I was in a site security review at the firm. Dr. Ariel Crane's office number appeared on my phone. I stepped into the hallway and answered on the second ring. "Mr. Harwick," she said, "I need you to come in as soon as you can. It's about Wren's blood work from last week's physical." Wren had been due for her 6-year well-child visit. Routine, height, weight, vaccinations, standard panel. Dr. Crane had drawn blood as part of the workup. I hadn't thought twice about it. I was at the office 20 minutes later. Dr. Crane closed the door before she sat down, which told me something before she said a word. "Wren's blood type is AB negative," she said carefully. "Based on what I have on file for you, O positive. That combination is not genetically possible with you as the biological father." I sat with that for a moment. The room didn't spin. My chest didn't cave. It was more like a piece of a puzzle I hadn't realized was missing suddenly dropped onto the table. And the picture it completed was one I'd been looking at for a long time, without quite seeing. How certain is this? I asked. Blood typing alone isn't a DNA test, Dr. Crane said. But in this case, the incompatibility is absolute. I'd recommend a formal paternity test to confirm, but the blood results are unambiguous. I thanked her. I drove home. I sat in my driveway for 11 minutes. Ren was 6 years old. She called me Daddy. She brought me drawings of horses and asked me to check for monsters under her bed, and fell asleep on my shoulder during long car rides. She was mine, in every way that word meant anything real. But Evelyn had been lying to me for at least 7 years. Before Silas. Before the wellness retreats. Before the language shift and the distance and the staged Instagram photos. This wasn't a woman who drifted. This was a woman who had been living a constructed version of our marriage for the better part of a decade. I called Devin that evening and told him. He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, this reframes everything. It's not a pattern of recent deception. It's a pattern of sustained deception across the entire marriage. That matters enormously for the custody argument and for the financial fraud case. I know, I said, but I need you to understand something before we go further. Ren is my daughter. I'm not using this to walk away from her. I'm using it to show who Evelyn actually is. Understood, Devin said. And for what it's worth, that's exactly the position a judge wants to hear from a father. I ordered a formal DNA test the following morning through a lab Devin's office used. Chain of custody certified. Court admissible. Results in 7 business days. While I waited, Declan brought me something else. He'd been running a deeper trace on Silas's background and had flagged an active federal inquiry. IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Opened 14 months ago, targeting the Vain Clarity Foundation for unreported income from residential retreat fees. Cash payments, unrecorded, routed through a series of small LLCs. The inquiry was ongoing and not yet public. Silas wasn't just a fraud and a manipulator. He was under federal investigation, and Evelyn had transferred the beneficiary rights of my life insurance policy, using a forged signature, to an organization the federal government was already watching. I printed Declan's summary, added it to the file, labeled it clearly. Owen called that same afternoon with one more piece. He'd made contact with a former client of Silas's from Atlanta, a woman named Renee Corbin, who had left the program 8 months earlier and was willing to speak on record. Her account of what happened inside Silas's operation matched every pattern Owen had documented across the other 11 families. The emotional dependency building, the language coaching, the step-by-step instructions on repositioning the husband as a threat. Renee was willing to testify. I called Devin and told him we now had a federal investigation, a forensic handwriting analysis confirming signature forgery, a DNA result pending, and a witness ready to testify about the systematic nature of Silas's operation. Devin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in the measured tone of a man who very rarely allowed himself satisfaction, "Kurt, I've been doing this for 23 years. Walk me through those again." I did. "All right," he said when I finished. "We're not just winning this case. We're ending his operation." The DNA results came back on a Friday morning. I was at my desk when the secure lab portal sent the notification. I opened it, read the confirmation, closed the browser, and sat for a moment looking at the corner of my monitor where a page had stuck a small drawing of a dog that sort of resembled Hector. The result confirmed what the blood typing had already indicated. Ren was not my biological daughter. I called Devin. He had the report within the hour. Then I called my mother. Eleanor Harwick, Nora to everyone who knew her, was 71 years old and had spent 40 years as a school psychologist in the Raleigh-Durham area before she retired. She had a way of listening that made you feel like the room itself was paying attention. Well, I told her everything, not the condensed version, the real one, start to finish. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm coming to Charlotte, and I'm bringing my files." She arrived 2 days later with a rolling suitcase and a calm that filled whatever room she walked into. I hadn't told her about the custody case specifically, but she'd been watching the girls for months. She'd noticed things I hadn't allowed myself to name. The way Paige flinched slightly when Evelyn raised her voice. The way Ren stopped mid-sentence and looked toward the door before finishing a thought. Small things. Clinical things. Things that a former school psychologist with 40 years of experience recorded automatically and completely. Nora sat with both girls for an afternoon while I was at work. She didn't conduct an assessment. She just spent time with them, helped Paige with a puzzle, read Ren 3 picture books, made grilled cheese for lunch. When I came home that evening, she was waiting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad covered in her precise handwriting. Paige is managing, she said. She's built coping patterns. She's trying to take care of Ren, which is too much weight for an 8-year-old. Ren is struggling more than she shows. The stuttering is stress-related and will improve with consistency, but she needs the source removed. She tapped her notepad. I'll testify to all of this. Professionally, not as your mother. As a licensed psychologist with 40 years of documented child observation. I looked at her for a moment. Mom, don't thank me, she said. Just win. The second piece came from a direction I hadn't expected. Dorothy Donovan, Evelyn's mother, called me on a Tuesday evening. We'd always had a decent relationship, mostly built on mutual love for the girls and a shared ability to navigate around Evelyn's sharper edges. She sounded tired when she spoke, and careful, like someone choosing footing on uncertain ground. Kurt, she said, I've been holding something for a few weeks and I can't hold it anymore. She told me that when the girls had stayed with her 6 weeks earlier, a Friday night, Evelyn had dropped them off and said she needed space for an alignment session. Silas had been present at Dorothy's house when she returned to pick them up. He'd come with Evelyn, uninvited by Dorothy. And while Dorothy had made coffee in the kitchen, she'd heard Silas talking to Paige at the kitchen table. She hadn't heard everything, but she'd heard him ask Paige, do you think Daddy understands your feelings? Or does he just stay quiet and hope they go away? Dorothy had come back into the room immediately. Silas had smiled and changed the subject. She hadn't said anything at the time because she hadn't known what was happening. Now she did. I have it on video, she said quietly. I keep a tab on the counter for recipes. The camera was running. I didn't realize until I went back through the footage later. I drove to her house that same evening. She handed me the tablet. I watched the footage twice, 2 minutes and 18 seconds, clear audio, clear video, Silas coaching my 8-year-old daughter at a kitchen table while her grandmother made coffee 20 feet away. I called Devin from Dorothy's driveway. His voice changed in the way it does when something shifts the entire weight of a case. That footage, he said, is the single most important piece of evidence we have. Meanwhile, my sister Nancy had been a problem I'd been managing quietly. 3 weeks earlier, she'd posted on social media in support of Evelyn. A long, earnest paragraph about the importance of supporting women who chose healing over silence. She hadn't known the full picture. She'd taken Evelyn's version at face value because Evelyn had reached out to her personally, cried on the phone, and told her I'd become cold and unreachable. Evelyn had known exactly what she was doing. I didn't confront Nancy. I sent her Dorothy's video. I sent her the fraud filing. I sent her Owen's summary of the 11 prior families. She called me 11 at night, 3 days later. She was crying before she finished saying my name. I didn't know, she said. Kurt, I'm so sorry. I didn't know any of it. I know, I told her. What do I do? You take the post down, I said, and you let me handle the rest. She took it down within the hour. And 2 days later, she posted a brief, clear public statement. I made a public comment recently without knowing the full facts. I was wrong to do so. I apologized to my brother. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. It existed, and it was true, and that was enough. The week before the hearing, Silas made 3 moves. The first was a legal threat, a letter from a third-party attorney I'd never heard of, alleging that my digital monitoring of household devices constituted an invasion of privacy and demanding that all recordings be destroyed and that I issue a formal public statement retracting any claims made about Silas Vane's professional conduct. The letter cited potential damages of $2 million. Devin read it in about 90 seconds, then set it down on his desk with the expression of a man who had just been handed something mildly amusing. He's scared, Devin said. This is a pressure move, not a legal one. He has no standing. He was a non-resident third party in your household. You had every right to monitor your own home. He picked up his pen. I'll respond today. 48 hours, this disappears. Devin's response was 2 pages of precise, documented rebuttals. The threat evaporated in 36 hours. The second move was more personal. Evelyn filed a report with Charlotte-Mecklenburg police claiming I had made threatening statements to her during a phone call 2 weeks earlier. The call she cited had been about the girls' school pickup schedule, completely routine, and completely recorded. I sent the audio to Devin within the hour. He submitted it to the court the same day. The investigating officer reviewed it, noted the absence of any threatening content, and closed the report the following morning. The third move came on a Tuesday, 4 days before the hearing. I came home from work to find Evelyn in the kitchen with a document in her hand. She held it out and said, flatly, "Your lawyer needs to see this." It was a report from a psychologist named Dr. Warren Gill, not Dr. Clough, not anyone I'd heard of, claiming that I displayed symptoms consistent with unresolved authoritarian trauma response syndrome, and that my professional background created a documented risk profile for coercive domestic behavior. I read it, standing at the kitchen counter. Warren Gill, I said, is not a licensed clinical psychologist in North Carolina. I checked his credentials 2 months ago when his name came up in Silas's network documentation. Evelyn's expression didn't change. "He's licensed in Tennessee," she said. "He's not licensed anywhere recognized by the American Psychological Association," I replied. "And the syndrome he's diagnosed me with doesn't appear in the DSM-5. Devin is going to enjoy this document." She took it back without another word and left the room. Devin did enjoy it. He also filed a complaint with the North Carolina Psychology Board regarding Gill's conduct in issuing a clinical report on an individual he had never met or evaluated. That complaint would take months to process, but it was on record. The day before the hearing, Evelyn's attorney withdrew from the case. Not quietly. He filed a formal motion citing irreconcilable differences with his client's instructions. A junior associate from the same firm showed up at our pre-hearing submission deadline to file the last of Evelyn's paperwork. She looked like she'd been handed the assignment 20 minutes earlier. Nora arrived at my house that evening and made dinner for the girls. Paige asked why Grandma was staying over, and Nora told her it was because she wanted to see the birdhouse they'd built in the backyard. Paige accepted this completely and went to show her. I sat at the kitchen table after the girls went to bed and went through the file one more time. Every document, every timestamp, every affidavit, Owen's 11 family summary, Dorothy's video, the forged signature analysis, Wren's medical records, Paige's journal photographs, Dr. Clough's assessment, the IRS inquiry reference, the fraud conviction from Oregon, Nora's professional observation notes. Devin called at 9:30. "How are you?" "Ready," I said. "You've been ready for weeks," he replied. "Tomorrow you just show up." I put the file away, turned off the kitchen light, and looked out the back window at the dark yard where the swing set stood against the tree line. Wren had named the left swing the fast one and the right one the quiet one. She always chose the quiet one. Tomorrow I was going to make sure she still could. Courtroom 5C was smaller than I expected for the weight of what was being decided inside it. Judge Cynthia Halbert was already at the bench when we entered. Late 50s, silver-framed glasses, the composed expression of someone who had seen every variety of human wreckage this process could produce and had long since stopped being surprised by any of it. She moved through preliminary matters quickly, with the efficiency of a woman who respected her own time and expected everyone else to respect it too. Devin opened for our side with a methodical precision I'd spent weeks watching him prepare. He didn't dramatize. He sequenced. The monitoring log showing systematic coaching of both children. The journal prompts. Wren's speech therapy referral. The footage from Dorothy's tablet, which he played once, in full, without commentary. The courtroom was very quiet during those 2 minutes and 18 seconds. Evelyn's junior attorney objected twice. Judge Halbert overruled both times without looking up from her notes. Devin then introduced Owen Pruitt as an expert witness. Owen took the stand with the unhurried authority of a man who had spent 30 years in rooms where being wrong had real consequences. He walked through the 11 documented families, the Kevin Doss conviction, the pattern of conduct analysis. He was specific, calm, and completely unshakable when Evelyn's attorney attempted to challenge his methodology. Then Nora took the stand. My mother sat in that chair like she'd been doing her whole life, which in a sense she had. She identified herself, her credentials, her 40 years of documented child observation work. Then she described in precise clinical language what she had observed in Paige and Wren over 2 separate visits, the compensatory behaviors, the environmental monitoring, the specific stressors she'd identified. She cited developmental literature. She used the word coercive twice and defined it both times before anyone could challenge the definition. Evelyn's attorney attempted a cross-examination. Nora answered every question with the patient thoroughness of someone who had been deposed before and found it mildly interesting. When Evelyn took the stand, she held herself together better than I expected. But Judge Halbert had a way of asking follow-up questions that didn't allow for the soft edges Evelyn was used to working with. When Halbert asked her directly why she had changed the life insurance beneficiary without her husband's knowledge, Evelyn said she had relied on advice from a financial consultant. The Vain Clarity Foundation, Judge Halbert said, reading from a document, which is currently under federal tax inquiry and whose primary officer was convicted of fraud in Oregon in 2014 under the name Kevin Doss. Evelyn said nothing. "I see," said the judge. 2 hours later, Judge Halbert delivered her ruling. She was direct in the way that only people with real authority can afford to be. Full legal and physical custody to Kurt Harwick. Supervised visitation for Evelyn, pending psychological evaluation. Immediate freeze on all remaining joint assets, pending the fraud investigation. A formal referral to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office regarding the forged signature on the insurance document. Silas Vane, Kevin Doss, was already gone. He'd quietly closed the Dilworth studio 2 weeks earlier, the day after the federal inquiry became public record. No forwarding address. Outside the courthouse, Devin shook my hand without theatrics. Owen Pruitt gave me a nod that meant more than most speeches. I picked up the girls from school that afternoon. Paige ran to me across the parking lot. Wren was right behind her, her small face breaking into the wide, uncomplicated smile she used to wear before all of this started. "Can we get ice cream?" Paige asked. "Absolutely," I said. We got ice cream. We went home. I pushed Wren on the quiet swing until she asked me to stop, and then she asked me to keep going, and I kept going. That night, after they were asleep, I sat on the back porch with Hector and a drink I didn't finish. The neighborhood was completely quiet. The swing set was still in the dark. I'd won, but winning felt less like a victory and more like solid ground. The kind you don't appreciate until you've spent months standing on something that kept shifting. I was done shifting. For months past, the Mecklenburg County DA's office opened a formal investigation into the forged insurance document. Evelyn cooperated partially. She maintained she hadn't known the signature was forged, that Silas had handled the paperwork, and she trusted him. Whether that was true or a legal strategy, I genuinely didn't know. Devin said it didn't matter much for our purposes. The civil finding was already on record. Silas, Kevin Doss, surfaced briefly in an online forum under yet another name, offering remote clarity sessions at $300 an hour. Owen Pruitt flagged it within 48 hours and forwarded it to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. After that, the profile disappeared. Owen told me he'd keep watching. I believed him. The insurance policy was restored to its original beneficiary status through the fraud remediation process. The Vain Clarity Foundation's assets were frozen pending the federal inquiry. Devin handled both without requiring much from me beyond signatures. Evelyn completed her first psychological evaluation in mid-October. The evaluator's report was measured. She was not deemed a danger to the children, but recommended continued therapy before unsupervised visitation could be considered. Evelyn had found a therapist on her own before the court required it. Devin noted that quietly, without making it mean more than it meant. She'd moved out of the house the week after the ruling. I heard through Devin that she was renting a single room in a shared house on the east side of Charlotte. Bare walls, a folding table, a mattress on the floor. Everything she'd spent 14 years building, reduced to what fit in the back of a borrowed car. I didn't feel satisfaction about that. I just noted the way you note the final consequence of a long series of choices. Her first supervised visit with the girls was at a neutral facility in early November. Paige came home and said it'd been okay. Wren said Mom had brought her a stuffed animal, and they'd colored together. Neither girl asked questions I wasn't ready for. Kids are often more adaptable than adults give them credit for, when the adults around them stop, making the instability the children's problem to manage. Wren's stutter resolved almost completely by September. Her speech therapist, Dr. Nair, told me at their final session that she was, in her professional opinion, a remarkably resilient child. I thanked her and didn't say that resilience in a 6-year-old shouldn't have to be earned this way. Paige built a birdhouse at an after-school woodworking club. She painted it green and yellow and asked me to hang in the backyard near the swing set. I did. 3 weeks later, a pair of wrens moved in. She pointed it out to me on a Saturday morning like it was the funniest and most satisfying thing that had ever happened. Maybe it was. Nancy came to visit in December, the first time she'd been to Charlotte in over a year. She brought gifts for both girls and spent an afternoon helping Paige with a model she'd been building. Before she left, she hugged me at the front door and said, "I should have asked more questions." "You know now," I told her. "That's what matters." Commander Reston called to check in sometime in October. He'd heard through mutual contacts that the case had resolved. I told him it had. He said, "Good. I always said you were the steadiest officer I'd worked with. I'm glad the judge figured that out." I thanked him. I meant it. One evening in late November, I was in the backyard with the girls after dinner. Paige was chasing Hector around the perimeter of the yard. Wren had stationed herself on the quiet swing and was watching the birdhouse with an expression of deep scientific interest. She turned to me and said, "Daddy, do you think the wrens know it's named after one of them?" I looked at the birdhouse. I looked at her. "I think they probably figured it out," I said. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to watching. I stood there in the cooling evening air with the swing creaking softly beside me, and I thought about what it meant to rebuild something from genuine materials instead of assumptions and hope. It was slower. It was harder. And it was the only kind of building that actually held. The girls were home. The house was quiet. Hector was exhausted from being chased. We were going to be fine. Not the performing kind of fine, but the real kind. The kind you build one ordinary evening at a time, until one day you realize you stopped counting them.